I told Eric that we were recording with Chris again today, and he was like, "Oh, he's great. This one will be good," which made me think to myself, like, have we had like, "Oh, they're terribles"? So I'm not going to press.
Let's not air that publicly, Sarah.
And that's just a man saying, "Oh, good, a man is going to be on."
Potentially.
I get to
Thank
listen
God.
to man things.
Just wait, though. Wait till he finds out where we go with this.
Right? Exactly.
So why don't you introduce yourself?
I am Christopher Rice, a.k.a. C. Travis Rice, practitioner of male, steamy, spicy romances. As Christopher Rice, I wrote all manner of crap. I just wrote whatever they paid me for. I just put it all down. Napkins, grocery lists. No, mostly thrillers and mysteries up until, I would say, around 2014. Romance Land got its hooks in me,
Yep.
and they've never entirely come out.
Fine.
So I have well, wait. First of all, welcome everyone to Fated Mates. We're so excited to be here with Christopher Rice / C. Travis Rice. But for our purposes, we're going to call you. What are we going to call you?
Chris, I hope.
That guy, the guy who's here today.
We're going to call you Christopher Rice / Chris.
Yes, that sounds perfect.
And I am Sarah McLean. I read romance novels and I write them.
And I'm Jennifer Prokop, a romance reader and editor. And we're here with Chris this week to talk about his new release,
Sapphire Dawn, the
Yes.
fourth in the Sapphire Cove series, which I have talked about multiple times on the podcast.
Yes.
It also doubles as a great dishwashing liquid.
Okay, that's funny.
Do you have the blue Dawn in your house?
No, I don't. I have Ajax
Well,
in
that's
my
really
house.
unfortunate.
Sapphire
like-
Ajax didn't make it out of the pitch
Sapphire
meeting. It,
Ajax.
it didn't pop. It didn't work.
Wait, I'm actually fascinated. We are a Dawn household.
We're a Dawn household too. A blue Dawn. We have Sapphire Dawn in our house.
Why?
Oh,
Why
okay.
Ajax? Like, wait, tell me more about this
What
weird
on
choice. I would have thought, as a
don't
Californian, if
know.
It's a
anything,
California thing, obviously.
no, Californians are like, I use, I don't know, like nature's, like, it would have like a cutesy
Serum.
name. Yeah, like
Yes,
nature's serum.
Nature's
and it,
seed.
and it would clean nothing. Like, it would
It
be
would
all
not.
organic.
This is
Right.
California blasphemy.
It's-
Yeah, totally.
Listen,
but you could pour a
Californians-
whole bottle of it down your garbage disposal and everything would be fine. But
Sure.
it cleans nothing
Cleans
except
nothing.
the bowels of
But
the
you're
sewer.
definitely getting
Californians,
COVID. So
You know it's
Yeah,
true. I'm sorry.
All
They
right,
know it's
now
true.
We're talking, we have
but you're better
we can't
people than us.
dishwasher detergent. We have too much to get to.
I started it. I'm sorry.
But
I apologize.
I support all manner. We welcome all dishwashers here.
Yeah, we really wanted to do influencer boxes with a bottle of Dawn dishwashing liquid
Be
in them.
amazing.
The postage was through the roof. We had to
Because of
cancel them.
liquids, solid liquids.
Yeah, and they weighed about
Firearms.
20 pounds. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. I like it.
Well, we are super excited. So we've been together before. You've joined us
Mhm.
before. The last episode we talked about bullies.
Sapphire Cove?
Yes.
Yeah, we
Right?
talked about bullies. Just sort of enemies, hardcore childhood enemies.
Redemption romance. That's what you
That's what
talked
it
about.
was.
Redemption. Right.
Yeah,
We got
because
there.
we didn't feel like there was maybe enough bully romances, but I think we all came up with plenty enough bully romances.
Well, now
Exactly.
there are lots of bully
Yeah.
romances.
Now that's like
yeah.
the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Times
Right.
have changed.
but Chris, you said like romance got its hooks in you in 2014. Why? Is my first question.
I went to a dinner party. That's why. Okay, there were two things happening simultaneously. One was I kept hearing about male romance, and I kept thinking, what is this crap, to be completely honest. I was like, this isn't going to be something I like. I don't know what people are talking about. It's women writing gay romance. What? I had heard about it steadily over the years. It was all contempt prior to investigation. And then finally one night, I sat up in bed and I said, I've got to find out what this is about. Because I really did. I was like, I needed something to
Time,
read.
I just have to know.
Exactly. But the thing that was happening on Amazon is that the bestseller lists were getting more granular and specialized.
Oh, yeah. Right.
So there were more like gay romances with a cravat in them, gay romances that take place on an island. So all of the titles were authors I didn't recognize, but there were these beautiful, gorgeous covers because I didn't know much about romance in general.
Mhm.
And so I thought, okay, I'm just going to randomly read 2 books, and I was such a pretentious jerk about it. I was like, clearly one will not be enough, so I will have to consume
Yes.
2 simultaneously. And I downloaded, thanks to the algorithms or whatever, I downloaded a title by Harper Fox and a title by Heidi Cullinan, who has since transitioned and identifies now as June Cullinan, which I didn't know at the time. They were just 2 quote unquote women writing these books, and I absolutely adored them. I started reading them at the same time because I loved them, because I reached that realization point in the middle of each book where I realized, oh my God, these heroes are not going to die. One of them is not going to kill the other. One is not going to wither away from AIDS, because a gay book was a certain thing at that point, and romance was not it. I was on the edge of my seat listening to your Vincent Verga episode, because he was out there by himself, and I truly believe that if AIDS had not happened, we would have entered like a Vincent Verga era. Like gay romantic fiction would have stepped out there alongside all the other big, juicy, emotional sagas that were topping the bestseller list. But because the AIDS epidemic came crashing down on us, and we needed to articulate how we were feeling about it, everything became necessarily political and really literary. So a gay book was a very specific thing in my mind. And this, rather than feeling like an aberration, expanded my definition of it. But I was pulled into the romance field not by any desire to write one, because I didn't think I could necessarily. I was invited to take part in a project called 1001 Dark Nights, which was the first stage of what became Blue Box Press, which is now known to most people as the publisher of Jennifer Armentrout's From Blood and Ash series, which has been a phenomenal hit for them and for publishing. But it was a series of novellas. They came out once a month, and every author in it cross-promoted everybody on their social media. So it wasn't just a new way of writing, it was a new way of doing business and promoting. And it plugged me in immediately to the communal environment and tone of romance in general. That there was a sharing of the wealth in terms of intelligence and how to publish, specifically in digital, which was happening, that I did not see in mysteries or thrillers. I certainly didn't see it in literary fiction. And I became kind of addicted to it. And so I published a few novellas for their project. One was a menage with a lot of MM and the MMF, which was really fun, but they were all paranormal, which was, I've written a lot of paranormal thrillers. I had a real desire that began to build at that point to write just contemporary male, because I had begun to read and consume so much of it. So, that was basically my origin story.
So tell us about, and I mean, you've been on to talk about this series before, but now it's kind of becoming almost like a little bit of its own like universe, right? So you have the world of like this, big Southern California beach resort. And now there's like, 4 novels, a couple novellas. You've just signed a contract to do some more. So kind of why Sapphire Cove, right? Like why this, or is that's the name of the resort, right?
Yeah, that's the name of the resort.
And the series.
The short answer is going to be probably this podcast. Because
welcome,
this
everyone.
Podcast, yes, thank you. If you like the books, if you don't, call Jen and Sarah.
Hard eyes.
You all were my don't go crazy during the pandemic listen. Like I would listen to you guys every night, and you guys had a deep library at that point, so I could go back. And to be perfectly frank, and this may be a controversial statement, I'm not incredibly wild about where contemporary is right now. I'm a third-person, cinematic, multiple points of view reader. That's what I really like. And you all, with the Trailblazers episode, took me back into I'm a Nora Roberts stan. And I went back and discovered what romance novels really were in the 80s and 90s structurally, because I should say a lot of the content is not. I'm not all on board with, and you guys do a great job of sort of giving asterisks and disclaimers on that front. But the sort of the early 80s paperback saga influence on romance, I know the sagas were their own thing, which have since just completely collapsed. That was really something I wanted to lean towards. The series was inspired by a Nora Roberts trilogy, the Dream Trilogy, which is about a hotel in Northern California. but it's very loosely inspired. And I think it was very much, what would I do in a hotel with all queer men as the focus? And I started just sort of hashing it out over the Christmas holiday after kind of a difficult year, reading articles online about this strange new novel virus in China and thinking they'll clamp that down. And then when the world closed, I had a lot of extra time, and that was really how the series was born. So I had initially imagined 3 books. And what happened was, when I got to the third, I got a completely out there idea that just sort of took possession of me, and it pushed the idea that was originally going to be book 3 to book 4, which is the story of Donnie, who I thought was maybe going to be the most difficult character in the whole world to tell happily ever after about, for, I should say, because he is a proud former sex worker who runs an adult entertainment studio today. And there's some of that out there in the world of KU male, and a lot of it's very fun. But it's usually about boys and men inside of that world finding each other. And I knew I really wanted a kind of taming the beast storyline with Donnie. I wanted him to fall in love with and find a relationship with someone who had nothing to do with the porn industry. And that was going to be a lot more work. So that's maybe why I put it off till book 4. So there's plans for one more novel and a couple novellas. We've got a new novella that's going to come out next year in summer of 2025 that I'm just finishing up right now. And I've never done this before. Like, I've never done I always call it the Bridgerton structure with people outside romance, because it's their first experience by way of the Netflix show. Right. They get it. Other romance people, we don't need it explained to us, right? We've done it. It's like, this is his book. This is going to be his book. It's all interconnected in the same kind of physical space or family or house or whatever. So that's what the Sapphire Cove thing is about. But I think the appeal of a resort, like, I wasn't like, ooh, what I really want to do is set an entire series in Orange County.
Why not? Sounds great.
Because, I was like,
everyone uses Dawn in Orange County. Right?
That's a total dishwasher. Like, there are things I love about Orange County. There are things I really do not love about Orange County. But in order to get the type of resort that could be a sort of year-round crossroads of the world, we don't have those in Los Angeles. Our coastline in LA is very urban, meaning that the city comes kind of right up to the sea. We have fun hotels here like the Casa del Mar, but we don't have the expansive private
big
villas.
Resort, right?
Yeah, big resort. You have to go further south to get that. And Laguna, that sort of area, Newport Beach, that was where I knew Sapphire Cove was going to have to exist.
Here's okay, I'm going to interrupt and tell you all a funny story, which is, so we were recently in LA, and I actually was lucky enough to have dinner with Chris and invited my brother Mike and Mike's partner Nate. My son was there, and then another one of their friends. And one of the things is, I thought I was going to be in LA a little bit longer, and it sort of kicked around the idea of like, I want to go to the beach. And I'd sort of like realized, like, I was like, I might have to go to like Huntington Beach. And my brother was like, don't do that. You'll regret it. And yet at the same time, when we were at dinner and you were sort of talking about like Orange County, I sort of remembered this like I was like, wait, I'm literally having this conversation in 2 places. If you want to create a world that you can constantly expand, it's smart to have the setting be what ties it together, especially, as you said, like crossroads of the world. Like, people can always be added to that setting. People can come work there. People can come on vacation. Whereas if you start off a series thinking like, okay, it's 3 brothers, it's 3 brothers. Right. And so I think one of the things to think is like, if you are interested in, okay, I might want to have this be flexible, then, what ties the stories together, having it be a place rather than a family or something else, means that you can constantly, be expanding, adding. And I will also say, I love a world where you can add novellas. Right? Yes. Like, it is, I feel like, really underutilized as a way of like, just like, okay, hey, here's this character who, my readers love, and now I can just boom, add them in without really committing to, okay, now it's, 100,000 words about this person. So I think that's also really smart, is like to have both the novels and novellas.
Yeah. And I think, in terms of just pure business strategy, we can play with pricing on the novellas with less risk, and it's more easier. We can make them free for an extended period and say this is an intro to this world, if not necessarily the same three characters as you were putting out. I think that's really important. I would say that I think if someone's going to go that route, which I do recommend, make sure you really love the setting, because I will tell you, I have had to get comfortable with writing the line "sparkling marble floored lobby" 600 million times, or cliffs plunging into the sparkling blue ocean. A lot of sparkling. I got to do word searches but it's got to amp you up just to be there, right, in your mind. And I think it's easy to find that, but I think people, particularly writers, when they're first plotting, can be a little bit too logical, and you got to look for something that has resonance for you.
Yeah. Well, I think also there's something to, this is your take on what you have avoided here is the small town pitfall, which is you're able to layer, to put a level of, I guess, sparkle over the whole, the resort, because you can bring in billionaires, you can bring in actors, you can bring in money or power or whatever, in a way that it's like, trickier to have a small town in the, say, Appalachian Mountains, where they're just a crew of billionaires roaming through,
Yeah. Absolutely. I love small town. I've read a ton of straight small town.
Yeah, I know that about you, that you're a small town reader.
Everyone is like, I used to leave the Rip Bodice, and Rebecca Weatherspoon would be like, when she worked there, she was like, you leave here with the shopping bag of an old retired white lady. I was like, yeah, I kind of do. But I was getting something out of those books that I didn't get anywhere else. But you're very right. The pitfalls are the same. They have to explain, why has this billionaire decided to start a boat factory, a wooden boat factory?
Right.
And you know what?
Like
because
shop.
as you all say, romance reasons.
It is romance reasons.
Anyway.
But it is nicer when you don't have to. You only have so many romance reasons in the hopper for every book. And when you don't have to use it for why is the billionaire in the cupcake shop, then.
Well, and I have to deal with, why are all these queer people here? Right. And so that's way easier to answer at a hotel than, it can be challenging. And there are a lot of writers who do it, and they do it well. But you end up having to write about how threatened they feel in a small town at the one gay bar, unless you're talking about Rehoboth Beach or Provincetown or some place that's clearly
some sort of created small town where it is just everybody's queer. Like Ashley Herring Blake, right? As her, I think they're in Portland or they're somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, and it's like just a sea of queer people. And I don't know, I actually think I don't blink at all about that as much as I blink about billionaires. Maybe because I like billionaires less.
Well, I think it's I do think it's a world building kind of decision you make going in. I am going to just create a space where queer people can be in a small town and be really happy. And this is not a concern, or it is, right? But I think if you put them in a resort in Southern California, at least I think a lot of people will assume oh, okay, well, that just is that's a safe place for queer people to be. Right. Yeah. And so I don't, I think that's probably not entirely true based on what my brother told me about whether or not I wanted to go there with my son. But it is a really interesting, assumption I think people bring to the table.
And I think getting back to your brother's point, which is very well taken, Huntington Beach has made a very specific effort to be a bastion of MAGA in Southern California. There is an organized activist effort to turn Huntington Beach, which isn't really present in all of Orange County. Orange County kind of went purple. They did not go for Trump, I think, in 2020, if I'm not mistaken. And Irvine and the areas around USC have become increasingly diverse. But right there, he had journalistic cause to spotlight Huntington Beach, because they have really tried to get on the news for all the wrong reasons.
This week's episode of Fated Mates is brought to you by Robin Peterman, author of As the Underworld Turns.
Okay, here's the deal. Cecily is a 40-year-old kind of aging actress who once had a stint as a child star and is now trying for a comeback. And she thinks she has the perfect vehicle to do this. She's got a sitcom that she's trying to get up and running. She thinks this can give her a real second chance. The problem is one day after like this terrible day on set, she gets home and there's a knock at the door. And on the other side of the door is a man who is claiming that she is a demon.
Oh.
It's all okay though, because he's
Sure.
also a demon and he's there to protect her because there's a bounty on her head. Cecily does what any intelligent woman in the world would do and absolutely doesn't believe him. Instead, calls her father and says, this crazy thing happened. And the dad is like, actually, there's something you should know.
Oh.
You kind of are a demon. And then on the heels of that, Jen, a massive battalion of demons invade her house and try to kidnap and kill her. But thank God, Abaddon, Abe to his friends, is there to protect her. And then she's got herself in a pickle because she is desperate for this second chance as a sitcom actress, but also like, is she going to be able to fake being human and also hide all of these demon shenanigans going on behind the scenes? It sounds super fun.
It does sound fun. If you would like to read this slow burn romantic comedy set in the paranormal world of soaps and assassin demons, then this book might be for you. It is available in print, ebook, audio, and with your monthly subscription to Kindle Unlimited. And if your podcasting app supports it and you click on the chapter title, you can buy the book right now. Thank you to Robin Peterman for sponsoring this week's episode. One of the, kind of the topic at hand today is we're going to talk about essentially like characters with, like we've been calling it on our group text, like daddy issues, but like not the good daddy, right?
Right.
So
Not the good daddy.
Not the good daddy, everybody. The bad dads.
daddies.
The bad daddies.
Let's call it bad daddies.
The bad dads.
Yeah.
And this is and I think it's like an interesting topic because we talk a lot about, and I think it's interesting that we started off talking about like sort of those old 80s and 90s like sagas.
Mm-hmm.
We had if you started reading romance like when we did, right? A lot of men, regardless, right? Straight men, gay men, like are coming to like falling in love from a place of like mistrust.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Especially straight men, right? Like
childhood trauma is
Yes.
rampant.
I was traumatized by my family. I was traumatized by the first woman I fell in love with who was a whore, and I'm sorry I'm laughing, but that's really what they used to say. And therefore I cannot love again, right?
Right.
But at the same time, like it is in fact true that people that come from broken families or unhappy homes would find it very hard to trust falling in love, right? So this is a through line in romance, which is like, how do I learn to love if I myself came from a home where I was not taught how to love?
So obviously when I started prepping for this, I was like, first I went through, I've never read a book because
Of course.
I've never read a book.
Fathers
And
in
then
romance.
then I went through like every book is this, like every historical romance is this in a lot of ways, right? And I think that what I kind of came to was this thing that very famously was said, and I'm sure I've quoted it on the podcast before, by Lucia Macro, who is now who is retired, a very sort of legendary editor at Avon, who came through Harlequin and really shaped a lot of the romance in the late 80s and through the 90s. And she was at a conference, probably in RWA, on a panel, and someone raised their hands and they were like, why are all the parents dead? Like, why, in these books? And no, I'm sorry. It was like, why are all the heroes, why do they all have titles? And she was like, because a father has to die before a man can be a hero, right? And it's this sort of like very kind of funny, like weird perception of like what a romance hero must be and what road he has to have traveled in order to get to a place where we believe him as like the textbook alpha character, right? And obviously this is all in the past. And she caused a big ruckus when she said this, as you can imagine, because I think she said this like in the early aughts. It was like right around when I started writing, so maybe closer to like 2010. And I think there is something there, right? Like in historicals, characters have titles, which means fathers are dead, right? And what I started thinking about this morning was fathers, it's harder to kill a good character and give your hero a sadness, right? Like I miss my father. Like I felt connected to him. He was a decent man and he died of, whatever the thing is, a dysentery. But versus saying like his trauma is going to be about being unloved, right? So that we can give him love. And I think in historical, at least, like this is where you have to sort of name Julia Quinn for giving the Bridgertons like a really decent dad who happened to die and left them all with like their own little mini traumas, but like he was a good man. And so I think the history of romance is bad fathers dying so that heroes could mend their hearts with heroines.
It's interesting. You're making me think of the first book in the Sapphire Cove series, which is Sapphire Sunset, because I don't kill the father, but the father is a terrible burden on Logan, the hero. And he basically decides he cannot be with Connor initially because it's a workplace attraction and he needs the job to support his father's medical bills. And so there's a point at which his father says to him, he nurses his father as long as he needs to until he gets over his issues, and then there's a time jump. And his father later recognizes the extent to which Logan sacrificed his own needs for him and says, you know what, if I had known, right? He basically sets him free.
Yeah.
So I think there's a way to do that without necessarily killing the father. Now, we're not dealing with historical, it's contemporary. Like, it seems a little extreme.
No, it really does, but it feels like a real shortcut to broken hearts.
But it reminds me of how many Disney characters are orphans.
Yeah.
Right? I think it's a way of really ramping up that hero's journey. Like, you have no one.
Yeah.
You have got to become a hero in your own story now because no one is coming to save you, right? I think, and it gets telegraphed as a message of be independent and find your own way to young children in that respect, which is different from romance. But I think I'm very much of the mind that a character cannot be with the one they love until they get over that. What's blocking them is probably in their past, and it's probably their perception of the past, what they have told themselves their past means about them. And I love that. But I will tell you, from a practical standpoint, that has made the books very long.
Yeah.
Layering in that, if the parents are alive, it's a longer book.
Well,
now you have to put them on there.
Yeah.
Right. Now they're people.
They've got to. The second book, it's a mother. Nasser's got to really sit down with his mother, and they got to talk through their past, and he can't advance past the bullying and how he feels about it, so he can be. So it's always there, but I love that stuff in romance. I love the family drama, and I know there are a lot of people now who think it's background or it's filler or it takes away from the spice, but for me, it's all about
shorter books. But
yeah. Well, whereas when KU started, it was like make it as long as possible because it's all about the page reads. Now KU books are like 150 pages long because there's so much competition.
No in between. They're 150 pages long or they're 700 pages long, right? There's no exactly. Like you're not in for like a mid journey there. You're like, okay, yeah. So tell us about this book then. Like, how did you approach? If you're interested in family drama, like how did you approach that with these characters?
So the most important thing to me about the character of Donnie was positive sex worker representation, because there's a lot of it in male. I don't know and there's some in sort of more conventional, traditionally published romance. There's not a ton of it. And I did not want to tell a story in which he needed to be saved or rescued from his sex work, because while he is no longer a performer, right, which kind of makes it easier for him to have a relationship with someone who's not in the industry, he's not going to disavow his past, and he's continuing to run an active studio as a director. So his workday is with naked people having sex. And a big part of that was depicting how he views it as just a job. Like, one of the first things he does when he's interested in someone is, come see me work, because I want you to see how not turned on I am in the course of a work day. It's about lighting. It's about how my models are feeling. It's about the paperwork that is required legally that ensures people are not intoxicated, they're not being coerced, they're not minors, all that sort of stuff. So that was kind of hanging over my head, which is a hard thing to write under because, again, it's very sort of logical and strategic. But his past was established in previous books. He's a runaway. His father literally punched him in the face when he saw him kissing another man. These are things that have happened to so many queer men who did not grow up to be sex workers that I didn't want to depict the linkage as being sort of cause and effect necessarily. Like a lot of runaways are queer, and they've been kicked out of their houses because they were trans, because they were gay, all of the above. So he has that story baked in books like 1 and 3. And I really felt it was important to tell his entire response to that he went off and got in difficult situations. But the thing that he deals with when it's time to sit down and open his heart to Richard is that he says something that Richard finds very bracing, which is like, yeah, I was still a teenager and they were grown up, but I don't see myself as a victim. And Richard is like biting the tip of his tongue off what he finally says to him is that, I hope it's okay for me as someone who loves you to believe the men in those situations should not have been doing. He says you were entitled to come across adults who saw you as more than a body, more than somebody to offer them. And it's his way of sort of trying to gently show Donnie, maybe you can be strong without pretending that all of this was okay. Like you should have had, he runs off to his aunt's house. The father, who's a bigot, really pressures the aunt to stop supporting him. And Donnie makes several goes at trying to get kind of jobs in the North Dakota oil fields as a minor. It doesn't really pan out. But he says very brazenly from the very beginning, I dreamed of doing porn. It was a dream of mine. I went to California to do it. He's got this pride around it. And Richard knows at that point, because he's really falling for Donnie, that he has got to be quiet and listen and not try to frame Donnie's narrative for Donnie, because that's what Donnie's been dealing with his whole life. It's what everybody in sex work deals with, representation of them in media that's not written by them, that's not often consulted them in its creation, and that is trying to sort of tell them who they are. And they can really be annoyed by it. I have a lot of friends who work in the industry, consenting adults who have done things that consenting adults should be allowed to do for money. And they're not really interested in being lectured about it. So all of that, a lot of that was about, okay, then who is the right partner for Donnie? And what that created was someone who on paper seemed polar opposite, fancy events planner, doesn't do any wedding for under $1 million, who has had this picture perfect Instagram ready marriage with a hedge fund manager, everything that's supposed to be perfect. And the guy was absolutely terrible to him. The guy didn't love him. The guy didn't support him. The guy cheated on him with all their mutual friends. The guy was terrible. And so for Richard, it's this journey of realizing the difference between someone who actually loves you and shows up and someone who just looks good on paper. And so that was where I eventually found the connection and the romance.
I have two kind of major things I want us to branch off and mention. And one is in many straight romances with bad parents, there is a narrative journey towards repair, right? One of the ways I will show that I am in my relationship is good is that I will repair things with my parents. And I think that can actually be not the right thing to do when it's queer romance, right?
Yes, absolutely.
It is a valid choice to never go back to the people who cast you out, right? Or who made you feel the way that you did, or force, that you had only one choice and it was to run away. And I think that's one of the things that I think is just really important to say. When we talk about bad parents, it doesn't mean that the happily ever after of a romance does not have to mean I don't know, burying all that bad blood. If it really needs to just be happily ever after can also be I'm never seeing these people again.
Yeah. That is what it means. And you know, it's interesting, since I started as a reader with a lot of male, I was used to that construct or that model. And when I got to straight romances, and it was always about repair, as you said, I was sort of like, maybe.
Yeah.
But it depends on what the bad parenting was, right? It's like, because with queer people, you're dealing sometimes with, I don't agree with your lifestyle, which is like, what? Like, you can't point to any damage I've done. You can't point to what this is actually doing to you. This isn't like we had a disagreement over money in the family business. This is just, I don't know how to get around this. And, you know, I would never be comfortable. Thankfully, my mother or father never put me in this position. But I have friends who've been in this position of saying, well, you can come for Christmas, but he can't, or she can't, or they can't. You know, like, bye.
Yeah, right, right.
Like, that's, I don't see how you get back from that. I think that, you know, there can be a difference between having a character finally say the thing they need to say to the parent and fixing it. Like, sometimes they say it and it needs to be said, and that's the end of their journey with their family for that book. And you don't necessarily need to sit them all down at dinner. But I think you're right. I think there's pressure from readers right now around that. And I think there can be pressure from editors too.
Oh, interesting.
You mean pressure from readers to repair?
Wrap it all up. Yeah, to not leave any of it hanging.
Yeah,
you know,
I think that's right. I think readers in general, and obviously this is like a painting with a very broad brush, but I think romance readers like Happily Ever After to feel like happily everything after.
Yeah.
Like, there is no bad in their life now. They are happy forever. Which is another good reason why we killed off a lot of fathers, a lot of parents in, you know, early decades of romance. I mean, still, I remember tweeting at, God, I don't know, a couple of years ago and saying, like, can you name a book where all four parents are alive and like decent?
No.
And it's virtually impossible.
It's virtually
There
impossible.
are a handful of them. People are going to immediately tell me like which books are, and you should. I'm interested, but it's tricky. And I think that's because we install our parents install our buttons, right? Like, I mean, there is a natural sense of like the character work, the internal conflict around a character, right? And this speaks to romance in general, I think, is if they're not together on page 1, there has to be, if they don't get together until page 400, there has to be a reason internally for that to be the case. And internal buttons are often installed by our family.
So you know what, though, Sarah? I wonder if that has changed now. In the land of like the cinnamon roll, like kind of male-female romance where everyone's just nice.
Yeah,
I
maybe.
wonder if now people could be like, oh yeah,
so.
I could list those. This week's episode of Fated Mates is brought to you by Victoria Hamill, author of Is This Love for Real?
Well, here is the third book in Victoria's Marley Creek romance small town series. And this one is about graduate student Mabel Weaverton, who like needs to finish a project. And she's very lucky in that her boss is leaving town for 2 weeks and asks her to house sit. And like, would it be okay if she just takes care of his dog? What he does not say to her is that this dog is a puppy.
Oh.
And puppies are basically monsters. And when she gets there, like thinking she's going to do the job and like work on her project and like just have this like perfect little dog, she realizes like this thing is unhinged and she needs a dog trainer to come in and help. Lucky for her, Ethan Harper is on a summer break from his own job and happens to be a very, very good dog trainer. So he's there and like up for distraction, which comes in the form of both the puppy and Mabel. And when a tornado approaches, lots of stuff happening in this book, Jen. Like when a tornado approaches, the two of them and the puppy get stuck in the bathroom together.
Ooh, I love it. Listen, I love plot. Great. Give it to me.
And finally acknowledge that there's something between them. So there they are in a storm, getting stormy, steamy. I mean, an ex Girlfriend comes back. There's all sorts of excitement in this book. It's going to keep the pages turning.
I love it. If you love a spicy small town romance that has Hallmark movie vibes, but with more steam, which a lot of people are looking for.
Sign me up.
Exactly, including forced proximity and a cinnamon roll hero who is also a short king, then Is This Love for Real might be for you. It is available in print, ebook, and with your monthly subscription to Kindle Unlimited. And if your podcast app supports it, you can tap on the chapter title right now to buy the book. Thank you to Victoria Himmel for sponsoring this week's episode. There's been a lot of conversation about like sort of women writing male-male romance that is kind of always ongoing, but there's been like a recent flare-up, right? And, you obviously are not there to speak for all, men writing gay romance, but, we've talked about, I'm also everybody, like Chris knows we're going to ask him this question. We're not like, Lori.
It's not a gotcha.
Yeah, we're not, no gotchas. Do you have anything that you would like to talk about? I think in terms of like we're giving you this platform, like how does it feel to sort of be in that space where, obviously, as you said, like some people women start off writing male romance and transition or realize like, hey, maybe I am in the queer spectrum or something, right? And then other ones we talk about how clearly have a very, I don't know, like straight gaze, right? And it feels a little different. So I don't know, what are your thoughts?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts. I think, no, but it's a good question. And there's what I went through personally from the moment I went and downloaded those two books, my own emotional journey with it. There's what I've learned about its history from before I started paying attention to it. I think this is the most important thing. Romance novels are a space that were created by women for women. And around 2013, there was a growing collective interest in including stories in which both of the heroes were the same sex, the same gender identity, and there was a conversation about the implications of that and the responsibilities of that was happening in no other genre of popular fiction. Mm-hmm. Nobody in mystery gave a damn. Nobody in horror was talking about it. There were gay writers in those spaces, but the very fact that there was hand-wringing over this topic early on is a testament to the romance community's larger commitment to inclusion. Not everybody, but a lot of people. So I think that's very important. A lot of the queer men who come into this conversation and set off a bomb on the topic don't seem to have even a basic familiarity with what a romance novel is, what we consider to be a commercial romance novel, what the expectations of the genre are. I think some of them, or many of them, I should say, have a definition of what is a gay book that is, as I talked about it earlier in the podcast, literary fiction, dark, political, urgent, disturbing, defined by tragedy and loss, or as some people would call it, trauma porn. So they come into this space, they don't know much about romance, they download some free samples, and what they encounter is the generally optimistic and elevated tone of romance fiction in general, and they say this is not authentic, to which I say you are not the only queer man on the face of the planet. So you're not, like, just as I'm not allowed to define this issue, they're not allowed to define it in the negative either. And I think what I have seen that is the most important response to this question is that whenever a queer man sincerely enters this space, writing something that's going to fulfill the basic expectations of a romance novel, a happily ever after, emotional connection, a relationship-centered story, I don't see any barriers thrown up to keep them out on the basis of the fact that they're male. In fact, I see a greater interest. Oh, finally, a man is doing it, people will say. Now, you can get into what's popular versus what's not, but I get really nervous when we start policing consenting adults about what turns them on. And I just think, like, I like the alpha on alpha bi awakening storylines? Not really. They don't float my boat, but they float somebody else's boat. I like a lot of sort of femme guy mask top on femme guy. That's a problem for a lot of people. They don't like that. And I'm not really interested in them getting up in my grill about it. So I try not to get up in other people's grill about it. But I think part of what did keep me in romance land was that There was at RT in New Orleans, the Romantic Times Convention, a whole panel track devoted to male-male romance for the first time. Like I said, I'm repeating myself. There were no panel tracks for gay books at Thriller Fest. They weren't happening at BoucherCon, which was the mystery conference. And it's not about faulting those spaces. It's about saying there was something going on here that was actually welcoming to queer people in the larger sense. But the final point I'll make before I shut up about this is this was a very queer space from the very beginning, because it was populated by a lot of female writers who had been told, if you want to do anything queer and have a space at anyone's table, it has to be boys. And so what you had were a lot of bi women, a lot of trans feminine individuals. You had a lot of people who were like, okay, well, there's no space apparently for my sapphic novel, because we didn't even use the term back in the aughts. It was either lesbian or gay. Like nobody was making space for anybody else. So they were like, okay, I will write my story with two allegedly cis males in the lead roles. And now we're seeing some of those writers being given the opportunity to do sapphic content for the first time. So I think it's important that the stereotype it has, that it was just sort of straight conservative women who wanted to see Spock and Kirk make out. That's a little reductive given who was actually in the space.
Well, and honestly, if you're like a new listener, it's really hard. I mean, you might be like, what is Chris talking about? But like, it was like chapter and verse for a long time in romance up until very recently that like women loving women would not sell.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Like, just like, you couldn't write it. Don't even bother. No one's going to buy it. And the way that has changed in just a handful of years has been, I think, like really pretty inspiring, right? Like, just like it doesn't feel, and I think a lot of this is probably the rise of self-publishing, showing that there are, hey, there is a marketplace for this, right? Yeah. And I think but it is, I mean, it's, like, I remember people being like, if you want to read queer books, like you said, it's got to be boys. Yeah. That's all there is.
And we didn't use the term queer either. I struggled with the term queer up until recently. Yeah, it was either gay or male was really the term everybody used. And I thought that was actually a diplomatic consideration of the fact that the authors weren't women, right? So it was like, I'm sorry, many of the authors were women. It included
focusing on the characters.
Exactly.
I just want to name check. We unfortunately will never have her on as a trailblazer, but Anne Allen Shockley, who wrote Loving Her in 1974, that was like on the heels of The Flame and the Flower. It was all happening at the same time. That was the first, like, it was biracial lesbian romance published by a traditional publisher. And I mean, that was all happening way back.
Yeah.
And then traditional publishing really
and
and eliminated a lot of these voices for a long time.
Right. Well, and another trailblazer to listen to is Radcliffe, who talks about the importance of,
I was about to bring up that episode.
Essentially like queer bookstores, right? Mm-hmm. And how small queer presses really did this work for a long time. And, it's been kind of this terrible tragedy that as these things have become more mainstream, as these voices, books, and it's like easier to get everywhere, we've seen the disappearance of the spaces that like kept it alive for so long.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I will say towards the end, well, it's not the end of queer bookstores. We're getting them back, but some of the ones they were challenged by how to buy romance, because they said the romance press has put out so many books and I don't know which ones. It wasn't like a traditional publisher where they say, we're really going to push this book or we're behind this book, and they would make their buying decisions when they were dealing, because we had some digital presses that for a while were doing a good job with queer stuff, and they both had their own individual scandals, which was disappointing. Terrible. But their interactions with physical retailers was challenged for that reason. But yeah, the Radcliffe example is great, but the framing around Radcliffe, which I think she addressed when she was on your podcast, was that, well, she's retired from her initial profession and this is her dream, and it's not about making money. And she really did create a community for her authors and do retreats on her farm and all this sort of great stuff. But there was this, like you were saying, there was this expectation you can't make money doing anything with two women. And I think that's been necessarily upended.
All right. So I think we should make some more recommendations for bad dads.
Okay.
The bad dads. I like you, Chris, though, and probably Sarah too, found myself really thinking like, wait, there are different kinds of bad dads, right? And then I was sort of organizing them on some sort of spectrum from basically like, mercurial to pure evil.
Sure. Lord of Scoundrels too.
Well,
Something else.
Yeah.
Something better.
To Kate Daniels is where I ended up with pure
There
evil.
you go.
So I thought that was also interesting because it really, I found myself thinking like, what, I mean, and also I would say I found myself thinking a lot about whether or not the characters with the bad dad were a woman or a man, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that also really sort of, kind of it says something different about like how they end up in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, and also how they the first person I thought of was Nora. I mean, if we're going to talk about Nora, which we've done already, like the first person talk about somebody who loves a bad dad, right? But the entire genesis of the In Death series is Eve murders her father when she is 8 years old because he has abused her so horribly, and Rourke's father kills his mother like as when they are children, and like this is their part of how they become like
even Rourke
as as characters together and as characters in the world, like moving through this kind of urban fantasy landscape where they are vengeance personified, right? Like, so it's like a really fascinating way that like Nora's so good at the job in the sense that, she gives you these two characters where something terribly traumatic happened in their past. They both did arguably like, killing your father at 8 is a choice for an author to give a heroine. And what she's done is just she pushes to the back like all of the drama with Eve. Like it is, this is something that created Eve as a character, and now she moves forward as that character, like with drive and purpose in the world. And that is, it takes mega balls for an author to do that. And like only Nora has that kind of like complete certainty in where she stands as a writer. But, for me, what's really fascinating about that is like, these are two characters who are so beloved in the world, in romance, in not romance, like everyone reads these J.D. Robb books and loves them. And we have two characters who are, really painted with childhood
trauma
fathers.
Yeah.
Well, and so much of that, and like to be completely honest, I have not read the In Death series. I need to. I read the big Noras, as they call them, the big thrillers she does usually in hardcover. That's such a great engine for a series, right? Yeah. You have this traumatic event. You don't depict the whole thing on page right away. You let it be this deep reservoir of drive and motivation.
Again and again and again.
Yeah.
But in like it washes over readers. Like it's so clever in a lot of ways the way she does it, because like you don't have to deal with the trauma.
Right. It happened a long time ago.
Like it's just sort of they're in a constant state of dealing with the trauma,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's a long, those books also live in a tradition, of detective fiction that has done a fascinating job of going deeper and deeper into who the hero or heroine is. Like, like Raymond Chandler, we didn't know much. And Lou Archer, who was Ross MacDonald's creation, he used to say, if you turn him sideways, you can't see him. He's supposed to be all about the case he's investigating.
Sure.
He's
not even a person.
Real Bond
yeah. But then
characters.
as we get more contemporary and the psychology sort of deepens and we look at who they are and what's driving them. And I think that's a lesson for all writers.
Then does Reacher have parents?
He does. His mother was French and his father was Marine. And the parents are dead when the series starts. And then he has a brother who dies in the first book. So essentially he is like a true loner. And then like, again, though, as the series kind of progresses, you learn some more about his family, but it's always kind of in the background a little bit, right? Of course.
Reacher doesn't feel feelings, so it's fine. This week's episode of Fated Mates is sponsored by Brie Castellini, author of Rehabbing the Billionaire.
Ellie Kerr has been the personal assistant and a long-suffering one to Nick Hartshorn, who is...
Hartshorn.
I know what
his destiny.
It really is. Well done. He's a billionaire, a CEO, and honestly a colossal pain in the ass, right? Everyone in the office calls him heartless.
Perfect.
And, but at the same time, whatever, a job's a job, right? And so Nick's personal latest indiscretion might actually, though, tank the whole business. And so right when this is happening, Ellie is kind of like going through something herself. She's approaching her 30th birthday, and she has basically promised herself that she's going to get around to losing this pesky virginity.
My fave.
Wouldn't you know it? Nick is game for the task. So they make a one-night only pact, but of course, it's one night is never enough. And so Nick proposes essentially a mutually beneficial arrangement where they continue their affair, and Ellie turns out to have a spine of steel and counter proposes instead.
Nice job, Ellie.
A marriage of convenience, which is,
nice.
I will help you paper over that scandalous past by making you look or appear to be a happily married man, and you will give me the financial freedom to go back to school, which is what she's always wanted.
All right, get it, Ellie.
Of course, just like any marriage of convenience, all of a sudden those feelings start to feel very real. So are they going to figure it out before, see what's right in front of them before it's too late?
This one is for anybody who loves a one-night stand, a modern-day marriage of convenience, which is rare, a boss-assistant romance, or forced proximity. You can get Rehabbing the Billionaire in ebook or with your monthly subscription to Kindle Unlimited. And in special podcasting apps, you can click on the chapter title right now to buy the book. Thanks to Brie Castellini for sponsoring this week's episode.
Well, I guess we're starting with Big Evil. I guess we'll just start there. In Alona Andrews in the Kate Daniels series, which is 10 books, Kate is it's a paranormal series. Like, she essentially her mate Curran is like the essentially like the king of all of the shifters, and her father is evil. He's Roland, who is like essentially like created evil in like by being a vampire, and the whole entire series is her gearing up to be powerful enough to kill her own father. Right. And so, and her mother essentially did everything she could to like get Kate away. But then, and she ends up being raised by a man who, teaches her to be an assassin. And essentially, like, everything about it is you one day will have to kill your father to live. And so you will never be able to be a child. Right. Everything about your life will be to teach you or train you so that you will have a chance to live in a way that your mother wanted for you. And so it's a 10-book series where, like, instead of it starting off with her having killed her father, it's, I will one day have to kill him. And he does not know that I exist, but he will figure it out. And that is like my destiny. And so again, it's like very much like a big part of her life is that she knows, like, in order to live, she'll have to kill him. Right. Which I think is like a really, kind of classic, kind of paranormal sort of, a big evil thing, but to have that big evil thing be your father. That's like a really good example in that series, the Kate Daniels series.
I can't believe I'm the one that's going to do a historical for a recommendation here, but I am, given how I come in. So I'm a big KJ Charles fan, but nobody is a bigger KJ Charles fan than Eric Shaw Quinn, who is my podcast co-host over at the Dinner Party Show and producing partner. And he is always like 5 books ahead of me in the KJ Charles verse, even though that's not actually, they're not all interconnected. But she, her recent, I think one of her first traditionally published books, The Secret Lives of Country Gentlemen, which I believe is part of a duology called the Domesday series, It's kind of everything you write about, Sarah, but it's about title, it's about inheritance. The main character, Gareth, has been abandoned by his father in his youth. The father went off to live in this grand country house, founded another family, dies, leaves everything to Gareth, who was like, what? And he's thinking this is an act of redemption, and he goes out to the country. The name of it, I can't. It's one of those beautifully bleak, marshy, British. Just I should know the name. Yes, it's like I watch BritBox crime dramas where people walk across this landscape all the time. I should be able to name it. But so he goes out there thinking he's inherited this wonderful gift, and what he has actually inherited, without spoiling too much, is the consequences of his father's secret criminal enterprise, which is going to bring him into contact with a handsome smuggler during the Napoleonic era when smuggling was at its peak because prices were what they were. And it is it's a fascinating thing to watch because what Gareth ends up doing, the father's not around anymore. There are villains who are around who are connected to the father's enterprise. But Gareth is about defining himself in terms of the absence of this bad man. Like one of the first things he does is he arrives at this estate and he sees the family is there, the other family, and his father made no provisions for them. And so Gareth is just supposed to kick them out onto the marsh, literally. And he says, no, I won't do that. And that's the beginning of this new Gareth who is sort of, sharpening his character in these circumstances. And KJ has written versions of that a lot because the fathers are very, historical queer men. One of the Cities on the Plain series, she deals with a biracial character who is dealing with the racism that can be baked into that from one parent. So she's wonderful at all of that. But I thought this was a particularly strong example because, as we were saying earlier, the father isn't around, but she has dramatized this plot that puts the father there in a weird way, in an almost ghostly way, but not literally so.
I love it. What about you, Sarah?
I have another historical rather. I want to talk about Caroline Linden, who I think is really an author who does this story very well. And I think she's just a superior writer, and we just don't talk about Caroline enough. I want to talk about Love in the Time of Scandal, which is kind of the perfect, for me, the best way that like Bad Dad gets written. And the thing that really scratches my itch is like hero with Bad Dad falls for someone who has like a really loving, great family, who can bring light into his life. So the hero of this book, Benedict, is he is set to inherit an earldom. His father is old and has been sadistically cruel, like to him his whole life. Like aside from just being disappointed in Benedict because he is soft and he is like too easy and like too affable, he has just brutalized like this poor kid. And there is one escape hatch, and that is because his father will not die, right? And he is holding the purse strings very tightly. The solution is he has to marry an heiress. And it would be really great if she were, super biddable, because then he could just like manage her money and like live his life and just get away from his father. This is the third, I want to say, book in the series, and he has in the prior book, in the book before, he courts the heroine. Like he is desperate for that heroine, and she ends up, marrying someone else, and he's kind of an asshole to the hero of that book. And in this one, her sister, so she marries off to, in the second book, and then her sister is left, and she is not at all biddable. She's like kind of a wild child. She has a huge fortune, but everybody in the way that it's written is like every man in London is like terrified of her, like does not want to have to deal with, like she is not worth the fortune, right?
Mm-hmm.
But she is for him. And so they kind of have this like back and forth. He's courting a different one of her friends, and like she kind of gets into it and like accidentally ruins that courtship. And then he's sort of like, you owe me, right? Like I was there at the altar twice now, and both times you've been in the mix and you owe me. And then like there's sort of a ruination. It's what I love about Caroline's books is she clearly loves these like old historicals where like everything happens. Just throw it all in. And there's always something going on. She knows how to end a chapter. So you're just awake through the rest of the night. But what's really beautiful about this is ultimately, yes, they marry and like it's sort of a marriage of, it's a requirement marriage. And then they have no choice but to fall for each other. And in the falling for each other, Benedict really shares like his terrible past. And we as readers don't really know like how deep it goes or how awful it has been. And of course, his father is alive. So he comes back into the book like he's a good villain. Like, I mean, he's a terrible person, but like she really delivers you comeuppance and like a certain amount of vengeance that's modern in a way. Like it's not just like, and then he fell into a vat of boiling oil, which I also love too. But so that's Caroline Linden's Love in the Time of Scandal.
The bad dad, if you're a woman, almost always ends up as being like high-key misogyny, right? You are just a silly little fool. And the dismissive way that your father, like these women's fathers treat them as being, you're just dumb. I have some sort of, I want something and I'm going to manipulate you to get it, or I've spoiled you rotten and now I'm pissed at you for being spoiled, right? Like there's a way in which like women who have bad dads, especially in contemporary, it almost always plays out as basically like, you're just so fucking dumb, And in fact, it was funny because I kind of had like different like names for this, but they all really are kind of the same thing, right? So it was like, in Manipulative, and that's like sort of Kiss an Angel by Susan Elizabeth Phillips, where he's going to like marry her off and like tamper with her birth control to achieve something he wants, or a lot of Tessa Bailey books actually have this, right? Sort of like in Fix Her Up, like she's the youngest daughter and like everyone just thinks that she's like kind of young and silly and not that smart. She's a literal clown and that's how they treat her. Then there's sort of the like spoiled version, right? It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey is this. One of my favorite YA romances from a long time ago is essentially like if you loved It Happened One Summer and want to read a YA version of that, there's a book called 52 Reasons to Hate My Father by Jessica Brody, in which a billionaire dad who has been spoiling his daughter her entire life. She gets her 18th birthday and he says, okay, Lexi, so now what you're going to do is every week for the next year, you're going to try a different, essentially minimum wage job to like essentially learn what it's like to be a real person. And this book is actually truly funny too. There's like a really funny scene where she's like working as a maid and just vacuuming everything up that's on the floor, clothing, whatever, like just like kind of like, I don't know why it's not working. And then, or, like in A Love Song for Ricky Wilde, I know I'm like listing a bunch of books, but this is like a really common kind of, I don't want to go into any of them in depth, but like this is often like, my father, just doesn't even understand her. Why can't you get in line and work for the family business like I want you to? The height of all of these, and this is a book we've talked about a bunch of times, is Her Naughty Holiday by Tiffany Rice, where she at Thanksgiving dinner, right? The whole family comes. They're supposed to bring the nieces and nephews, and they don't because they're just like, Clover's no good. And at dinner, she finally like loses her mind and curses everybody out and like basically is like, get the fuck out of my house. And the hero is like, all right, everybody, let's go, because he is a great dad and really realizes like when the woman in your life says, get out, everybody, it is my job to get everybody out. And that includes me. But it was really funny how many of the like sort of, and they're not like memorably bad dads, but they all have that same quality of just like, you're just, like I said, a silly little fool.
Okay. How do I begin this next one? Let me say this.
Talk about Nora, so.
We've talked about
We
Nora.
should have just let you go first and transition right to it.
I don't know. I'm glad. I was getting increasingly nervous as I was thinking about working myself up for this. So would I call this a recommendation so much as an example? And an example born of history and influence over the genre at the time. And okay. What I was also realizing is I thought it was an example of a bad mother, but I'll get into why it's actually really about a bad father in a second. This podcast has done a wonderful job of addressing the dark legacy of an author named Janet Dailey. And she's one of those names that comes up in almost every Trailblazer interview that you guys do, but you just sort of, it's kind of skip. And it's like...
We just sort of lied it. Just like,
yeah. So here are the facts, right? The facts from which we must begin all conversations about Janet Dailey. She brazenly plagiarized Nora Roberts, like pages and pages, multiple books, a list of books that began to grow when the scandal was exposed and people. And the scandal was made possible by bloggers in the internet who could sort of collectively compare notes.
Right.
And for people who want to dismiss it as storylines can be similar, it wasn't storylines. It was paragraphs. It was line breaks. It was lines of dialogue. It was somebody, and I think the somebody is the big question mark that hangs over the whole sort of scandal, was literally picking up copies of Nora Roberts novels and just filling new Janet Dailey novels with these paragraphs. So it's very hard to talk about, well, you shouldn't talk about Janet Dailey without including those facts. But it is very hard to talk about the history of American romance novels without talking about Janet Dailey because her influence was so profound. And the things that Janet was clearly obsessed with are things that I am also obsessed with. I am a slut for cowboys. Sorry, I said it out loud.
Listen, own it, Chris. Own it.
There were like two, inside every writer, there are two Janet Daileys. No, I don't mean to say it that way. There were two Janets, which you can see. There was the romance novelist Janet Dailey, and then there was the novelist who wanted to be a historical family saga writer like Louis L'Amour. He was Westerns, of course, but James Michener, Edna Ferber. These were people she was clearly trying to bend in the direction of, and she made attempts during her career to actually write books in the vein of those authors, and they were not as successful as her romance novels. All of this, of course, was before the plagiarism scandal was exposed.
This week's episode of Fated Mates is sponsored by 1001 Dark Nights, publishers of Kristen Proby's The Substitute, which sounds delicious.
It is, because it is about a grumpy boss, and I am already plugged right into it. I had a little moment where I was like, is this about a teacher? It is not. It is instead about a grumpy, demanding, and sometimes mean, and I bet only in a sexy way, guy named Derek Langley. He just can't keep an assistant to save his life. He's too demanding, Sarah. They just aren't up to his standards. So
I wonder what he demands.
Well, nothing sexy until the temp agency is like, we're tired of your nonsense. You got one more shot with us. And Maya Sterling appears in his office. She is brand new. She's just moved to Seattle to be closer to her siblings and friends. And this temp job is like perfect for her to sort of like get her feet on the ground in a new city. She doesn't plan on walking in and finding a sexy British grouch for a boss.
I mean, why not? They're everywhere in romance.
They're thick on the ground in Seattle. And she doesn't mind. She actually kind of is attracted to his little rough around the edges nature. The attraction is mutual, and the office becomes real steamy. But this position is temporary, and she's determined to maintain her professional distance to preserve her sanity and like make sure she can get another job when this guy loses his mind and fires yet another assistant. Will they be able to resist each other, or does
absolutely not
have other plans?
This one's for anybody who loves an age gap romance, hello daddy, and workplace romance. You can get The Substitute in print or ebook. And if your podcasting app supports it, you can click on the chapter title right now to be taken to buy the book. And thanks to 1001 Dark Nights and Kristen Proby for sponsoring this week's episode.
Shell over at Reformed Rakes podcast recently did an amazing 2-part Janet Dailey episode that is incredibly comprehensive. But I found out for the first time that her most influential series, the Calder series, was not published in the sequence that most people believe it was published in today. Amazon will tell you the books were published in the chronological order of their stories, and they were not. She started with the more contemporary story in which you meet the very bad father. And I say bad father because he's bad in an 80s way. Like, I read him today as a terrible father. But in that value system of the kind of Reagan era, he got the family to survive the cattle drive. He founded the ranch. He did all these things. So all his other weaknesses must be forgiven inside this sort of capitalistic contract of what success is. And then the book that you will encounter first in the Calder series, which I believe is called This Calder Range, was actually published down the road, and it was Benton, excuse me, but it's spelled Benteen. It was his story, and it is a romance, I guess, like, because it was my first experience with encountering a hero committing an act of violent sexual assault on the page. And I was like, reading it as a contemporary reader, I was like, well, clearly he's going to get crushed under a wagon wheel now. And I kept waiting for the wagon wheel.
God, he's the hero.
The wagon wheel never showed up. But thanks to Shell's podcast and her illuminating the actual chronology of these books, I realized what you're being given is the origin story of a previous book's overbearing patriarch.
Yeah.
But the thing that in that book made him the way he was is being abandoned by his mother. And his mother abandoned him because she thought his father was a loser and he didn't have enough money. And she goes off and she gets married. There was apparently a long tradition on the frontier of sort of British tourism, that titled British people would come over to see the sort of Wild West and the indigenous people, even though they didn't use that word. And she marries one of them and manages to get a fortune and sort of shows up late in his life once he reaches Montana and says, well, basically, we can go into business together, but I wasn't really your mother then, and I'm not going to be your mother now, so don't really call me mom. Like, that's a paraphrasing of what she says to him. But it is her heartlessness and quote-unquote practicality that turns him into this sort of damaged, angry man who abuses his wife at one point, and the wife forgives him because, you know, he's done so much
because
for
of
our family.
Right, exactly. Like, you forgive them because they hold the purse strings.
It was quite a read. I read the first 4 in the Calder saga, and it is like going back to, well, not just the historical periods in the novels, but going back to the time in which they are written, you know, and what we considered to be heroism, you know, and what we allowed heroes to do. It kind of blew my mind. I think I have some friends who use a term, I read it for science.
Yeah.
Meaning, like, they read books sometimes that they know they're not going to like. There was a lot I didn't like about these books, but I found them absolutely riveting to that extent. But I think the reason I bring up that example is I feel like, as someone who was also a young reader back then, we were more inclined to blame bad men on bad mothers.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
We would heap the blame on, well, your mother didn't love you enough. Your mother wasn't there for you. Because God forbid we should ever expect your father to be capable of doing any of those things. Whereas I think now we're in the realm of toxic dads, which I would argue is the more enlightened position, you know, that it can be both, right? But it's such a clear example. She is so, you know, and Janet Dailey could do certain things, or whoever was writing Janet Dailey's books could, but nuanced dialogue is not one of them. So the mother's portrayal is just like, well, of course I'm a bad mother. I'm a bad person. I like money. Get me more dresses. I'm evil.
You know, I mean, yes, honestly, that is true. That's how it really is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, and listen, bad women in romance, bad exes, bad ex-wives, bad moms, like they
ubiquitous.
Right, really often were portrayed as that. It was, you know, ham-handed, but not in the Jack Reacher way, where that's the size of his hands. Just.
And I think, but the thing that I think it offered readers at the time was that Lorna, the Benton's wife, gets the opportunity to lecture the mother. This is what you should have done. And I think that can be getting to finally tell your in-laws what you think of them is a gratifying fantasy in some ways. But you're right. It's not one that, in its execution in these books, it doesn't drip with nuance. I'll just put it that way. I survived talking about Janet Dailey on Fated Mates. I mean, we'll see. We'll see what the comments say.
I just want to add that I went to the Quaker Book Fair in the small town where I go during the summers, and there was a table full of category romances that I picked over with absolute glee, and I found a bunch of those Janet Dailey 50 State books, and I bought every one of them because I was like, these are 25 cents, and I'm so excited.
She got in an RV with her husband and went to every state in the union and wrote a book set there. I mean, I remember my mother, who didn't exactly have her finger on the pulse of romance, being aware of that. Like if a female author got out there and did something, it got to her attention. I remember talking about that. And the thing about the plagiarism scandal is if you're in a mixed generational group at a romance conference and you bring that up, it is like the Kennedy assassination. Everybody remembers where they were.
Knows, right. Yeah.
And they all have a theory because we know there was plagiarism, but we don't really know how it went down.
Yeah.
And everybody has different stories. Were there ghostwriters? Was it Bill? All this sort of, and it is fascinating to get some senior members of the community, if you will, get a few drinks in them and bring up that topic.
Right.
Everybody has their theory.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but no one will talk about it publicly.
No one.
Except Nora, who this is my favorite quote ever from our podcast, is when Nora said, I wanted to taste her blood in my throat.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I get it. I get it.
Nora. No notes.
Right. Yeah.
I get it. And I remember telling people about your podcast because they were like, I said, somebody's got to make a movie or a documentary about what happened. And they said, well, Nora will never talk about it. And I'm like, well, actually, maybe you haven't heard of a podcast called Fated Mates.
Yeah, I mean, we can say now that we were shocked that because I sent her an email.
Yeah, we asked her in advance. Would you talk about this?
And I said, we want you either way, but would you be willing to tell us this story? Because we think it's, an important piece of history. And she wrote back, absolutely, ask me whatever you like. And we were like, no one had ever asked her.
Well, there's the injustice of what she went through, but it's a formative moment in what kind of world Romanceland was going to be. Like it was a pick sides moment in this really profitable business, and people were damaged by the sides they picked. I mean, Nora Roberts never attended the Romantic Times Book Lovers Convention ever again because of how they covered it in the magazine.
I mean, and she told she said on the podcast, everybody will link to the Nora Roberts episode here so you can go listen to it if you haven't. It's terrific for lots of reasons. But she said on the podcast that it was really hurtful when people were like, well, it's fine. And everybody understands that it happened, but couldn't you just sweep it under the rug for the purpose of our friendship or our whatever? And it's like, no, this is her job.
Yeah,
this is her career, her art, her it's really tricky.
It was really, and that was the story that leaped out at me from your interview with her, is this is a woman who was betrayed by her friends, by many of her friends,
really
not
hurt.
all of them.
Yeah.
That you needed to shut up. Other women didn't stick up for her in this female space. It was riveting to me to hear that.
And I think there is a real sense, I mean, within the community of romance, there is a real sense that Nora is incredibly loyal to her core group of friends who we all kind of can name. And the reason why she is so connected to them still after all these years is because they did stand with her then.
Right. Yeah.
And I mean, this is why you should be good friends to people, everyone. Be loyal.
Absolutely. Also, and if anyone out there is confused, because this is apparent, I won't turn this into a Janet Dailey podcast, but Janet Dailey is dead. They have taken steps to hide that on her website, and there have continued to be Janet Dailey books, but they are, if you look in the fine print, they're commissioned by the estate. I have if the estate wants to continue doing books, but going to lengths to conceal the fact that she died in 2016 of heart problems was a little weird. When I first entered Romanceland, I thought she was still alive because there were Janet Dailey paperbacks popping up on, the drugstore racks. Anyway.
It is sort of astounding, isn't it, that they continue to publish these books as though this hadn't
Right.
happened.
Yeah.
It does go to show that it's like possible that there are a number of readers who just had no idea still.
Yeah, I think there are. They have no idea. I think the test of it, though, is that it was in her obituaries. That's how your legacy is. If you Google a Janet Dailey obituary in a major newspaper, it talks about the plagiarism scandal. And I hate to say it, but that's as it should be.
Yeah, I agree, right?
That's how
it really tainted her name. And it's like, and as you said, for those of us who like grew up reading her or like feeling impressed by like the idea of like, I'm going to really like set a book in every state. Like, I mean, these were like really, it just really felt like, I remember thinking like, oh, this is a person who must really want everyone to sort of feel seen or whatever way, right? And then to have it turn out that, the publishing, I think it's a cautionary tale that many people are like kind of running on the treadmill of trying to keep up with reader expectations. We hear people talking about this now who self-publish, how punishing and hard it is to publish at that pace. Right.
Yeah,
and,
it is.
And that was her excuse, was sort of like, I didn't even really know that it had happened. And it was kind of like, listen, you don't need to write 10 books a year.
I agree. And I think the other part of it, though, too, the historical part of it that some people may not realize today is what she became an alternative to, which was Barbara Cartland.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, if I was living in that moment and I had to choose between the two, I would choose Janet Dailey. I think Barbara Cartland probably had opinions about queer people I'm glad I never got to hear, because she said such
100%.
bigoted things, attacked Jackie Collins live on television.
Yes.
I would have wanted to live in the Janet Dailey world.
Yeah.
And ironically, that was the world creatively that Nora was in as they were coming up together. They wrote these sort of dirt on your feet, American set romances that didn't have to be gothic, that didn't have to be castles. All that's great, but it's a tragedy what she did. It's a tragedy.
Yeah. Well, this is amazing. And I do have more books, but we are well over time, but should we just keep going? I don't know.
I don't have more books, but
talk about
I
Elizabeth
talk
Hoyt.
to y'all.
Let me just
for-
talk
Yeah,
about
do
Elizabeth
one
Hoyt.
more, and then
Absolutely.
we can
Do
wrap
one
it
more.
up. I think it's fine.
Yeah,
Talk
we don't have
enough
to
about
end with
Elizabeth Hoyt.
Janet Dailey. Yeah, totally.
I'm just talking about historicals because every historical. So this is another one where like I really think you need to go into eyes wide open into this book. But Elizabeth Hoyt was writing dark romance before dark romance existed. And I know that people will disagree with me, but they are wrong. And so the Maiden Lane series, which is, I don't know, now I think 12 or 15 or
Right. I think
well,
it was
as long
yeah.
yeah, it's a lot of books. In fact, this might be the last book in the Maiden Lane series. Duke of Desire is the one I really want to hit on, but Elizabeth comes from this kind of very old school, like romance DNA. All her heroes are these like intensely dark kind of ciphers who, have big secrets and lots of childhood trauma, right? And the Maiden Lane series was conceived originally as like, what if Batman, but Victorian? But then it sort of became so much more than that, and ended up with this kind of trilogy at the end that is incredibly dark. Like
Yeah, I agree.
the trauma for the heroes at these last 3 books is really kind of devastating. So but in classic Hoyt fashion, the heroine is like in no way trauma. So again, it's sort of like this tiny pinpoint of light in this like very dark world. So the hero of this book is Raphael de Chartres. He is the Duke of Dymore, and he has Chris is already like, yeah.
Never love a man named after a church. Never go. It's not going to work.
That does seem probably like that actually seems like a very, very good.
They put it on a
It's the name of the
t-shirt.
town.
Right.
I think it's the name of the town the church is in. Anyway,
That's
never
your
get
new-
history
that's your new
tips from
tagline, Chris.
Christopher. Right.
Okay, so he has been attempting we know at the beginning of the book, and we've known this for a couple of books, although you don't have to read the other books, There is this kind of like evil group of powerful men. They're called the Lords of Chaos, right? Which could have gone the other way, by the way. I would definitely read romance novels about the Lords of Chaos, but not these. And they have been like terrible. They are like they're just like constantly kidnapping women. They're just like having, orgies and bacchanals with like drugged people. Like these are like not. They, again, could have gone one way, instead went like, the other way.
With each other? I was like sitting, I was like, oh no.
It's very upsetting.
Not good. Not good.
So this guy, we know at the beginning of the book that he has like beef with the head of the Lords of Chaos, whose name is Dionysus, obviously. So,
yes.
Because clearly. And Lady Iris Jordan accidentally like finds herself kidnapped. Like she just is standing in the wrong place at the wrong time.
I hate it when that happens.
They're out of a carriage come like a battalion of naked out of a carriage come a battalion of like naked men, and she's like, I'm being kidnapped. And then one of them, who is masked, spirits her away. He like, I don't know, waves an arm and knocks over everyone and then spirits her away. And she's like, this naked man is carrying me away. And here we are with the Duke of Dymore, who had been infiltrated. He had like been a spy. He got himself into the group with the intent of murdering Dionysus. But now he's too good of a man.
Question.
He must save her. Right?
I'm sorry. I had to interrupt.
Yes.
Why were they naked?
Where were they? Sexing or something inside the carriage. I don't know, Chris.
They were but do they usually kidnap people naked? It just seems like strategically not a good plan.
I mean,
I'm sorry. Romance reasons.
Sorry. They were like,
romance reasons.
This is classic.
She looks like she'd
reasons.
love us being naked in a carriage for no apparent reason. Just guy stuff.
Do I remember
just bro stuff?
I do not, but I do remember he is naked and picks her up and like spirits her away. And then like here he is like stuck with this lady, and suddenly because he was struck by the instinct to save her, he is now ruined. His cover is ruined. Now they know he's not a Lord of Chaos after all. He is somebody else.
He's a Lord of Kindness, Sarah. Sorry. I'm just going to stop now. I'm done. Everybody, off.
And so now he knows all this stuff about the Lords of Chaos, and like that can't be. So they're out to kill both of them, right?
Oh dear.
This sounds like it's sort of like a riotous, like fun, everything, we're chasing each other nude across the countryside. It takes a turn. And Elizabeth Hoyt is very dark in this book, and it goes real dark. It turns out that Dionysus, this like horrible, sadistic, criminal, evil mastermind, was Raphael's father.
Oh dear.
And he does not know that his father was dead, but he like kind of goes in to find his father and exact vengeance on him. And his father did do the worst of things to him. And so like, I just want everybody to be aware of that before they go into this book. But if you are out there and you are a dark romance girly, and you are if this seems like it would be the kind of story that you would like in contemporary romance and dark romance, let me tell you something. Elizabeth Hoyt is doing this business for you. Head over and watch Duke of Desire, or read Duke of Desire. But the truth is that the end of this is really beautiful because the heroine is so bright and sparkling in the way so many of Elizabeth's heroines are. And so there is a balance here that seems at the beginning of the book like it is an impossibility for them to be partners. Like it is a wonderful romance in the sense that all I want from a romance is these two can't possibly be together. Like they cannot make it work. And then she does do a lot of healing of him, and he loves her unreasonably. It's just, he is wild for her, which is great.
Cool.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great series.
It is brutal, so be careful.
Yeah, there's like everybody's an orphan in that series. Everybody, it's like
very gray. That series is very dark.
The sun never shines.
No, except for when the heroes look at the heroines. That's when it does shine.
And I can just start with that one. Do I need to work my way up to it?
No, you'll pick it up.
Yeah.
I do not recommend all 12 books of the Maiden Lane series unless you're like, yes, this is the vibe I want.
I'm like, read the one with the pirate. That's a good one. Maybe you could start with. That's like way back in like
Duke
number
of Finn,
4 or
is that
5.
right?
You listen.
Well,
I don't
may I ask
know.
a question? A man asked a question. It's going to be a new segment on Fated Mates.
Man asks on every episode.
I'm just going to call in. I have a question.
Man asks a question.
Pirates and bathing. Was that a thing? Because my block with pirate romances, my God,
Oh,
they
yeah.
must have
How are they
smelled
so
like
disgusting?
us. I'm just like
Listen,
a kettle
all
of dead fish.
historical
Oh,
romance
in the-
pretends bathing exists. Yeah.
I mean, first of all, in every pirate romance,
But
yes,
that's-
of course.
Listen,
What I
they're both
love-
pirates and had figured out how to desalinate the ocean and take nice baths. Come on, everybody.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a plot line I can get behind. Is that a thing? Is that the
Yeah,
Elizabeth
there's
Hoyt?
like a pipette and a Bunsen
Yes.
burner. There's
Obviously,
She is a
everybody.
scientist. She is a scientist who has figured out how to desalinate the ocean
Yes.
and plumb the ship. Plumb the galleon, it's
Right?
called. It's
I
the
mean,
Plumb the
no,
Galleon
listen.
series.
If they're on that, first of all, that crossing in the 1600s was like, I mean, that's a 6-month
No.
crossing.
You
Where
guys,
you get it now is in, well, it's not now because romantic suspense is in such a weird place. I don't know where
everything's
it is.
in a weird
Oh,
place. It's
weird.
fine.
But early aughts romantic suspense, I was reading the book. I'm not going to mention it because I thought the author was actually really good, doing a good job, but they were in these wetsuits for like 3 days without
Oh,
a shower, and they
no.
were getting it on. And I was like, I cannot have another chapter of wetsuit sex. I just, without some sort of bathing
No.
thing. And anyway,
but
like,
it's like, it's in whiteout, right? Adriana
Oh, yeah.
Anders is whiteout. Like they're in Antarctica in a blizzard. Like they can't, there's no water.
scrub some snow on your
Sure,
do a
that's
sort
fine.
of spot thing. I wrote when I was reading Something Wild by Christina Lauren. I texted them and I said, they just walked because it's about they're stranded out in the sort of desert. I said they just walked through a river. We're gonna have sexy times
You're like, I know.
because that's how you know.
You know what's funny is this is like, okay, in real life, I'm a teacher, and there's pedagogy is like the name we have for like how to teach something, right?
Mm.
But then there's something called pedagogical content knowledge, which is basically like the longer you teach, the more everything you take in gets filtered through your teaching brain. You're like, could I use this in the classroom? But I
Right.
would suggest that we all have like romance pedagogical knowledge because
Yes.
everything I read is like filtered through like, oh yeah, I read that in a romance. And you know, Sarah jokes about how I like the only person she knows that still reads the New Yorker, but just last month there was a whole article about pirates, like sort of like the golden age of pirates and like what brought an end to the pirates and why they weren't pirates anymore. And it was actually super interesting. And the entire time I was just like, I feel like romance authors intuitively understood what this like New Yorker article was sort of telling me about. I was like, I already knew that they were tools of a colonialist state. I already knew that like once the colonialist state didn't need them anymore, they like were no good anymore and they started getting arrested. I knew that from romance novels.
Yes, you
And
did.
now other people have to learn it from the New Yorker. Boring.
They definitely were always on the side of right.
And they knew how to desalinate water.
and they definitely were the sexiest men on sea.
Sure.
Yeah,
So-
they were it's like they made a decision. I'm in a group that bathes the least out of anyone, so I'm going to grow the most hair. I just can't reconcile
Well, but
those
how do
two.
you
Hair, which often
shave?
smells and needs to be kept
My
up and
flag
maintained.
means soap.
My flag means Ajax.
There you go.
Full circle.
We're right back.
Bringing it full
We're-
circle.
We just did it.
Everyone, the book that Jen referenced is Maiden Lane number 3. It's called Scandalous Desires. It's the one with the river pirate. Silence Hollingbrook is an impoverished widow, and charming Mickey makes her a deal.
Well, and he's a river pirate, so he can get off and take a bath.
He is
That's good.
He is
Yeah, that's
a
absolutely. He can
ruthless
bathe in the river.
Elizabeth
pirate.
Hoyt, no fool. She knows what's what.
They all
Absolutely.
bathe. That's right. Anyway, so that is that. But also, just pick up any historical romance, everyone, and you'll get daddy issues for free.
Oh yeah, totally.
Guaranteed.
Absolutely.
It's true. That's true.
Even Julia Quinn, everybody else has daddy issues. Like the Bridgertons are fine, but the other ones have a daddy issue.
We used to have the great man theory of history, and now we have the bad dad theory of history.
Exactly. But tell us about your favorite bad dad books. And tell us about the good ones too. Tell us if you have read a book recently where everybody's alive and having a nice time.
They all get along at Thanksgiving dinner.
See Travis Rice. The book is Sapphire Dawn. It is out now wherever you can get it. But you guys should just go back to the beginning and start from book 1 in the series and just tear through them because they're real fun.
Thank you so much. And the podcast is at thedinnerpartyshow.com because I did name check Eric Shaw Quinn, the world's ultimate KJ Charles stan. So if you're a KJ Charles fan who thinks you can outmatch him in a KJ Charles trivia contest, come check out our podcast.
That's
we just planned an episode for you.
Adriana Herrera should come on, and it should be just like Adriana and Eric Shaw Quinn, just
absolutely
KJ Charles
face off
the whole way. Have you heard our episode with her?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
That was a fun one.
I adored it. Yes.
Anyway, so we can find you at the Dinner Party Show. Where else can we find you? ChristopherRiceBooks.com. The Sapphire Cove series has a dedicated website. Visit sapphirecove.com. It looks like a real hotel website until the shirtless boys start. You're like, oh, it's that kind of hotel. I'm going to go there right now. I didn't know that.
Absolutely.
And what else? What do we usually do here? Oh, I'm Sarah McLean, and I'm here with my friend Jen Prokop. We are Fated Mates. You can find us online at fatedmates.net, where show notes abound. We will make sure we have everything that we talked about today, including a list of all of the books that we referenced and links to the Janet Dailey podcast that Chris referenced. If you would like to follow us on the internet, you can do that on Threads and Blue Sky and Twitter and Instagram and all the places that you are on the internet. We are there too. Or if you just wish you could have these kinds of conversations 6 other days a week, you can join our Patreon at fatedmates.net/Patreon. If you do that, you get an extra episode from us every month and access to all the other great listeners who want to talk about romance with you.
Don't forget, everybody, you can sign up for phone banking at fatedmates.net/fatedstates. We'll be phone banking starting August 24th, then 2 days in September, the 7th and the 21st, and then starting in the first Saturday of October all the way up until Election Day. So help us save democracy. Let's get Harrison Waltz in the White House and, make sure that everybody's going to be able to keep reading romance.
All right. Thanks, Chris, for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'll come back anytime you want me.
That's a deal.